I was 10 years old when I lost my grandmother. And at the time, she was my best friend. And I thought, wow, this hurts. I'm 10 years old, and I now know what depression is, I think. I mulled around, and I was sad, moping for days. One night, I sat down and decided to write her a letter. I used to call my grandmother Ta. I couldn't pronounce abuelita growing up, so I went with the last two letters. I started to write this letter, and it started with a lot of pain and hurt. But as my pen went down the page, I started recalling lessons that she had taught me. I started feeling gratitude. I started feeling good. I ran to my mom and said, "This makes me feel good. Can I read this at the funeral?" And she said, "Of course." So a couple days later, I found myself reading this letter to a crowd and crying. But it was a different kind of tear. It was happiness and joy. And I looked out, and the crowd, I think, was feeling the same way. And I thought, this is how I want to celebrate Ta, not the other way. This is the letter that I want to read out loud. I think that each one of us reads the letter out loud every single day. We begin it, "Dear World," and end it, "Sincerely, Erika." Now, the content of that letter is up to you. This is my philosophy in business, success, personal relationships, and personal development. I believe that there is a series of more interactive and emotional exchanges beyond just administrative ones that actually impact our success. Now, my letter, for the last 5 years, I've chosen to write it in what you'd call bright pink calligraphy on pastel paper filled with emojis and happy faces and lots of exclamation points. And some people don't believe it until they meet me, and it's real. My default state tends to be happy. Now, it wasn't always that way or to this extent, but I can only share with you today what this philosophy has meant for my life and my career and my personal journey. Now, I knew I always wanted to be positive. I knew I wanted to pursue the things that I loved, my goals, dreams, and passions, but the extent to which I did so didn't really take flight until circumstances changed my life personally. It was the summer of 2008, 2009, and my parents had just dropped me off at college together in our BMW, my little sister in the back seat. They drove all the way back across California to their lifestyle. We grew up fairly well off. My parents had a business for 30 years. We lived comfortably, went to private schools. Well, that year, my parents' business of 30 years closed. My dad fell into severe depression. My little sister ran away from home and fell into a lifestyle of drugs. My brave mom took on 4 jobs and worked every day to make sure that we still had health insurance and that I could stay in school. And I talked to her pretty often, but I didn't really know how bad things had gotten until I arrived home from my very first year of college, ready to stay at my house for the summer, like most students do. And I remember walking up to the house and seeing a linked chain bound across the 2 front doors. And I was told that I had 30 minutes to pack up all of my items that I wanted to keep with me, and that our house was being foreclosed, the house that my mother and father designed and built, the house that I grew up in. The next day, my mom and I had 24 hours to clear out that house, along with some neighborhood friends and other people helping from this tiny town. And she was so brave. She was amazing. And I wish that I had hugged her just a little bit tighter that day. Because what I didn't know then is that that would be the last time that I saw my mom for a few years. She chose to mentally retreat from society and everyone in it, and that included me. And as you can imagine, I was devastated. I remember socializing that summer in groups and politely excusing myself to go throw up. I was physically sick, not knowing what I was going to do at that point. I knew there was college, and I knew that represented progress, but I had no money, no job, and nowhere to live. But luckily, my high school sweetheart's parents extended an invitation to house me. I got my old job at Jamba Juice back, and I bartered for a 1993 putt-putt Honda Accord And I didn't care if it was taking me on a one-way trip. I knew it was taking me back to college. And a few months later, I found myself starting my second year in college. Shocked. I was floored and thinking, how did I get here? And I was thinking along that summer, so many different people started showing up. People to house me, people with advice, people pushing me and cheering me on. Go back to school, continue your life as normal. It didn't feel normal. I was in a bit of depression, crying when people weren't looking, and yet trying to figure out how I still had a network that felt like it was support. My nanny, who I grew up with, had decorated this room near our town in her house where I could stay, filled it with childhood knickknacks. It was moving, and yet I still felt so alone. But all that changed during a soap opera moment when I got a call a few months into college from the storage units where our parents' items and things from our house had been stored. And they said, "You're about to lose everything. These storage units are unpaid, and we're about to confiscate all of your stuff." I thought, again? And then I thought, I've made it this far, may as well say goodbye. So I took a deep breath and let the items go. Later that year, on my birthday, I was visiting my nanny. We were sitting in the room that she had decorated for us, and she looked at me and said, "I have something else for you." I said, "Is it a birthday gift?" She said nothing, but turned around and returned with a small marble jar. And I began to cry because I immediately recognized it. She was holding my grandmother's urn. And I was shocked and asked where this had come from. She told me she didn't want to have to be the one to tell me, but all of our items were being sold across the Central Valley at various flea markets and swap meets. And she was going and getting the items for me. That's what she decorated the room with. And the flea market had sold her my grandmother's remains for $3.99. Now, this was my moment, my revelation, and the moment that changed my entire life, because all I thought when I was holding it were the last two lines of the letter that I wrote my grandmother when she passed away, which were, "Forever we are whole and you're living in my soul. Forever we will be my grandma Ta and me." And that couldn't have been more true at that moment. I felt something that didn't feel like sadness. She began to cry and said, "I'm so sorry." And I said, "I'm not crying because I'm holding this. I'm crying because I never knew it was missing. Ta's right here. I didn't know this was gone." I threw my arms around her and said, "You're living right here. Everyone's living right here. The family I stayed with this summer, the people who call me daily, the people who email me. The reason I'm back in college is because of people leaving me with something every single day." I had lost everything, and in that moment, felt like I had the world. I was filled and overcome with gratitude and this need to leave something else with everyone who had helped me. They were leaving me with things every day, and I thought, I want to make impressions, I want to change people's lives, and I want to leave them with a letter that they want to read. And so I began to write my life with intention. I went back to college after that trip and immediately started with the roommate I was living with, who I often teased for calling her mom for everything. And what I really meant was, I wish I could call mine for anything. It was coming from such a dark place of jealousy, creating nothing. So in turn, I started showing love and support, and I was grateful that she had this network because so did I. And then I began to create something between us, and she's one of my best friends to this day. I started applying this theory to every facet of my life. I started hanging out with the students in the library who had their brand new MacBook Pros because I felt I was no longer at a deficit. I'm going to own that MacBook Pro. Maybe not this minute. I have my notebook. But soon, I'm going to own that MacBook Pro. I started joining the groups of girls who I would avoid because they all had these glamorous internships because they didn't have to work their way through college. And I thought, I'm going to have a glamorous internship. And you know what? I wrote my way into 3 separate scholarships that allowed me to get the lowest paying job in the broadcasting company that I wanted to work for. Score. Volunteer opportunities that had absolutely no pay, and I couldn't have been happier because I was working in the entertainment industry where I wanted to be the entire time. And I finally felt like you don't need to have a lot of stuff to leave enough with the people that you're connecting with. I also thought I could only go back for my family and the things that it seemed that I had lost by being my best self. And I'm happy to tell you that my dad and my sister are doing amazing, and I got to meet them on the way up, rather than drowning, trying to swim back for them at the time. I began networking, connecting with my colleagues and people I worked with, and reading their letters every single day, hearing their stories and taking them in, and in turn, their stories became part of mine. It seemed the more authentic my relationships became, the more sincere my success was. I became the youngest female marketing director at Lincoln Financial Media. I started an internship program, all while maintaining my true passion of interview and hosting, on-air, broadcasts, fashion, and radio. I loved it. I got to meet people, celebrities, actors, and artists that got to share their stories with me. I was reading their letters and in turn getting to tell the rest of the world about them, all the while hoping that I was creating a life for myself and my letter that they might want to read too. Every single day, we have the chance to make an authentic impression through our actions, behaviors, words. Nowadays, in 150 characters or less, you can write a letter. It's called a tweet. We have a photo with a caption and a hashtag, and we call it Instagram. Essentially, we've all been given these tools, a tabloid that you can write yourself. What do you want yours to read? And think about this. If you start your letter, Dear World, and you believe in any source, right? Source which we all came from and eventually will go back to, and we are all part of this world and made up of the same thing, then essentially, when you write Dear World, you're writing that letter to yourself. And that is the most important part. There is no need for a return address on that envelope because every single time, it's coming back to you. Sincerely, Erika.